Rosa had worked in the Donovan mansion for almost 3 years, but to everyone inside that giant house, she felt like a shadow. She moved quietly, cleaned quietly, and lived quietly, as if the world had decided she was too small to notice, even though she carried the weight of 100 silent battles inside her heart. Every morning before the sun even rose, she walked from her tiny rented room to the bus stop, holding her old bag close to her chest, her shoes worn out, her uniform ironed with care, and her eyes tired but gentle. She never complained, not about the long hours, not about the heavy work, not about the disrespect she sometimes received from guests who didn't even look at her while handing her their jackets. Rosa understood something many people never did. She knew that being poor meant you had to live with invisible wounds, wounds created by people who believed money gave them more worth. She had learned to swallow insults quietly because she had bigger things to worry about, things like her sick mother who needed medicine every week, things like overdue rent, things like hunger. Inside the mansion, the other staff members laughed with each other, joked loudly, played music when the millionaire wasn't home, but Rosa stayed in the background, just working, always working, wiping the marble floors, cleaning the giant windows, dusting expensive statues she would never be able to afford even if she worked for 100 years. But there was one person in the mansion who noticed her, even if everyone else didn't. 7-year-old Ethan Donovan, the millionaire's only son. Ethan always smiled at Rosa, always waved at her when she walked by, always asked her small questions like, "Did you eat today?" Or, "Why do you look sad?" Questions that surprised her because no one else ever bothered to care. Rosa adored the little boy secretly. She treated him like a younger brother, even though she never said it out loud. Her heart softened every time he ran past her with his toy cars or hid behind her apron during hide and seek when the mansion was too quiet for his liking. Mr. Donovan, Ethan's father, on the other hand, was a man who carried the entire world on his shoulders, a man whose name made people straighten their backs, a man who controlled companies, money, and power, yet somehow lost control when it came to showing emotion. He wasn't cruel, he wasn't unkind, he just lived in a tower built from stress and responsibility. And sometimes he forgot that the people working for him were human too. One evening, the mansion was hosting an important business dinner. Mr. Donovan had invited investors, friends, and wealthy partners. The place sparkled with lights, waiters moved around carefully, and Ethan, dressed in a small suit, sat quietly in a corner because no one paid attention to him. He looked pale, tired, and far too quiet for a child who usually bounced with energy. Rosa noticed it immediately. She had been dusting a shelf when she caught sight of him holding his stomach, breathing strangely, trying to pretend he was fine because he didn't want to disturb his father. She walked closer and knelt in front of him, asking softly if he was okay. Ethan whispered that he felt dizzy, but he didn't want his father to worry during the big event. Rosa's heart tightened. She gently touched his forehead and felt heat rising through his skin. She asked a waiter nearby to call the mansion driver, but the waiter waved her off and said it wasn't her job to interfere. Besides, the driver was busy moving cars for guests. Rosa tried again, asking another staff member to alert Mr. Donovan, but they laughed and told her she was overreacting. Children get sick all the time, they said. He would be fine, they said, but Rosa wasn't convinced. She had taken care of her younger cousins when she was a teenager. She had seen sickness before. She knew when something was wrong. When she looked back at Ethan, she saw him gripping his chest, his small body trembling, his breathing shallow like he was trying to pull air through a thin straw. Panic shot through her like lightning. She called his name softly, but he didn't respond right away. She shook him gently and his eyelids fluttered. His lips looked slightly blue. At that moment, the noise of the dinner, the laughter, the clinking glasses, the business talk, all faded from Rosa's world. All she could hear was Ethan's weak breathing. All she could see was a child who needed help, a child no one else was noticing, not even his father. She stood up and looked around desperately, but everyone was too busy pretending to be important, too busy chasing deals, too busy sipping wine. No one cared about the small boy on the verge of collapse. Rosa felt something heavy rise inside her, something she had buried long ago, the feeling that she had to take responsibility even when she wasn't supposed to. She scooped Ethan into her arms gently, shocked by how limp he felt, and she whispered that she would get him help, her voice shaking but full of determination. As she carried him through the hallway, passing people who didn't even turn their heads, Rosa realized something painful. She was the only one who saw him, the only one who cared enough to act. and she had no idea that the decision she made in the next 10 minutes would change her life forever. Rosa carried Ethan down the long hallway, her arms trembling under his weight, not because he was heavy, but because fear made her muscles weak. She whispered his name again and again, hoping he would answer, hoping he would open his eyes for even a second, but he remained limp against her shoulder, breathing in short, painful gasps that made her heart race faster than her steps. When she reached the main entrance, the mansion driver was leaning against the wall, scrolling on his phone, completely unaware of the emergency unfolding right in front of him. Rosa begged him to start the car, to help the boy, to do anything, but the driver simply frowned, annoyed that a maid was interrupting his break. He pointed at the driveway full of luxury vehicles and said he couldn't move any car without Mr. Donovan's permission. Rosa felt her chest tighten as Ethan's breaths became shorter, his head dropping deeper into her shoulder. She shouted for help, but her voice drowned under the distant music of the dinner party. She looked at the mansion gates, then at the long driveway, and then at the cars arranged in neat lines like trophies, gleaming under the lights, and that was when she saw it, the one vehicle powerful enough to cut through traffic, fast enough to save a life, the bright yellow Lamborghini parked right near the entrance. She knew what it meant if she touched it, she knew what people would say, she knew the consequences would destroy her life, but when she looked at Ethan's small chest rising and falling erratically, she understood that she didn't have the luxury to choose the safe option. She asked the driver again, voice shaking, telling him it was a matter of life and death, but he only shrugged and looked away. Her hands trembled as she shifted Ethan slightly and reached for the glittering set of keys sitting on the marble table beside the door. They had been placed there earlier by the valet, forgotten in the chaos of the event. The keys felt cold and heavy in her palm, like the weight of a crime she had never imagined committing. Rosa looked around one last time, hoping someone, anyone, would stop her, help her, or at least confirm that she wasn't making a terrible mistake, but no one did. In that enormous mansion full of wealthy, important people, she was the only person who noticed a child was dying, and because of that, she was the only one who could save him. With her heart thundering, she pushed open the Lamborghini's door, the leather interior smelling like money, luxury, and everything she would never have. She gently placed Ethan on the passenger seat, buckling him in with shaking hands, brushing his hair away from his forehead as she whispered that help was coming. She slid into the driver's seat, her breath catching as she looked at the buttons, screens, and controls she had never touched in her life. She didn't even know how to start the car at first, but her hands moved instinctively, searching for anything familiar. Her fingers found the ignition switch, and with a deep breath, she pressed it. The engine roared to life like a wild animal waking from sleep, and the sound echoed across the mansion driveway, drawing a few confused glances from afar. But Rosa didn't wait for anyone to react. She gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles turning white as she pressed the accelerator. The car shot forward with a force that pushed her back into the seat, the speed terrifying yet necessary. Ethan whimpered softly beside her, and Rosa reached over with one hand, squeezing his arm as she told him to stay awake, stay with her, stay alive. Outside, the city lights blurred as she sped through the roads, ignoring the shocked faces of pedestrians pointing at a maid driving a millionaire's Lamborghini. Some took videos, some shouted insults, some called the police, but Rosa couldn't stop. Every second mattered, and every breath Ethan took felt like it might be his last. Traffic lights flashed red, but she didn't slow down. Horns blared, drivers yelled, tires screeched, yet she kept going. She leaned forward over the wheel, whispering prayers between shallow breaths, telling the universe not to let this child die, not to let her be too late, not to let this be the day. Ethan Donovan's smile disappeared forever. The hospital came into view like a miracle rising out of the chaos. Rosa turned sharply into the emergency lane, the Lamborghini's tires screaming against the pavement. She slammed the brakes, jumped out, and rushed to Ethan's side, unbuckling him with trembling hands, screaming for doctors, nurses, anyone who could help. And in that moment, as hospital staff rushed toward her, Rosa finally allowed herself to breathe, not because the danger was over, but because she had done everything she could. Even if the world called her a thief tomorrow, even if the police dragged her away in handcuffs, she knew one truth that mattered more than anything: she had chosen to save a child's life when no one else cared to. Inside the hospital entrance, chaos moved fast. Nurses rushed toward Rosa, their eyes widening when they saw the unconscious child in her arms. Ethan's tiny body hung limp as she held him, his forehead burning, his breathing shallow and shaky. Rosa kept whispering his name as if her voice alone could pull him back to safety. The nurses quickly took him from her, placing him on a stretcher and rolling him toward the emergency room, leaving Rosa behind in the hallway, trembling, confused, and terrified. For a brief moment, everything went silent inside her mind, the bright hospital lights blurred, and all she could hear was her own heartbeat pounding painfully. She leaned against the wall, trying to steady her breath, trying to understand what had just happened in the last 20 minutes of her life. She had never touched a luxury car, she had never broken a rule, she had never even raised her voice at anyone, yet here she was, in a hospital, after driving a millionaire's Lamborghini like a criminal on the run. She looked down at her hands, still shaking, still marked with the pressure of holding on to both the wheel and Ethan's fragile body. Those hands had cleaned floors, washed dishes, folded laundry, scrubbed bathrooms, and today they had held someone's life. Rosa wiped her tears with the back of her arm, trying to remain strong, but the fear of what would come next began creeping into her mind like a cold shadow. It didn't take long before the sound of loud footsteps echoed through the hallway. 2 police officers rushed inside, followed by a hospital guard. People pointed at Rosa, voices rose, and someone whispered loudly that she had stolen the Lamborghini. The word stabbed her heart like a knife. Even though she knew she had taken the car for the right reason, she also knew the world didn't care about reasons, it cared about rules, money, and ownership. One of the officers approached her, asking her name in a firm voice. Rosa answered softly, trying not to cry. She explained that the boy had collapsed, that no one in the mansion listened to her, that she begged the driver for help, and that she only took the car because she thought Ethan would die. But the officer only nodded, writing something in his notebook, his expression serious. Rosa could see suspicion in his eyes, and it made her stomach twist painfully. Then something unexpected happened. A young nurse who had been listening stepped closer, her eyes filled with sympathy instead of judgment. She told the officers that the boy had arrived just in time. She said the doctor believed he was minutes away from a respiratory shutdown. She explained how Rosa rushed into the hospital screaming for help, holding the boy with the kind of fear only someone who truly cares would show. Her words floated through the tense hallway like a breath of hope. The officers paused, exchanging glances, but protocol still demanded they wait for the car's owner, the millionaire whose reaction could decide Rosa's future. Rosa sat on a bench, hugging herself as she watched the emergency room doors open and close, each time hoping a doctor would come out with good news, but instead she saw more people whispering about her, taking pictures of her dusty Maid uniform. Some even live streaming the story of the poor maid who stole a Lamborghini. The world loved drama, even if they didn't know the truth. Minutes felt like hours, and Rosa's chest tightened each passing moment. She kept thinking about her mother waiting at home, about losing her job, about going to jail, about the shame her reputation would carry if people believed she was a thief. She looked toward the emergency room again, whispering a small prayer for Ethan, because his life mattered more to her at that moment than her own freedom. Then, suddenly, the sound of hurried, heavy footsteps thundered through the hall. People turned, phones lifted, and gasps echoed across the room. Mr. Donovan stormed into the hospital with a face carved in panic, his expensive suit wrinkled, his tie pulled loose, his hair messy. He looked nothing like the composed businessman he always was. He pushed past people, asking loudly where his son was, demanding answers. When his eyes finally landed on Rosa, his face twisted with confusion and anger. He walked toward her, his voice sharp as he asked what she had done, how she got his car, why she brought Ethan here. Officers stepped in between them, explaining parts of the situation, but the noise in the hallway made everything muddled. Rosa stood up slowly, her legs weak, her voice barely steady. She told him everything, every moment, every warning she gave, every time she was ignored, every fear she felt. Her words were simple, trembling, honest, and painful. She didn't try to defend herself, she didn't try to sound brave, she only told him the truth. And for the first time since entering the hospital, Mr. Donovan went silent, really silent. His anger paused, his breath caught in his throat, and in his eyes, something shifted, something deep, something that would change everything that came next. The hallway grew quiet in a strange, heavy way as Mr. Donovan stared at Rosa. The noise of people whispering, cameras recording, and nurses moving faded into a distant hum. He looked at Rosa as if seeing her for the first time in his life, not as a maid, not as someone who cleaned his floors, but as a human being holding a truth too heavy for her shoulders. Rosa lowered her eyes, afraid of the storm that might follow, afraid of the anger that might fall on her like a hammer. Before he could speak, a doctor rushed out of the emergency room calling Mr. Donovan's name. The millionaire turned instantly and hurried toward him, his hands shaking. The doctor explained that Ethan was in critical condition, his lungs were inflamed, his oxygen levels dangerously low, he needed immediate medical intervention, but the doctor added one more line that sent chills through the hallway. He said Ethan wouldn't have survived if he arrived a few minutes later. The words hit Mr. Donovan hard, he stumbled back slightly, pressing a hand to his chest, his breath leaving him in a painful rush. Then he turned toward Rosa again, his voice softer, broken, asking her if this was true, if she really drove him here while everyone else ignored the child. Rosa nodded slowly, tears forming in her eyes. She said she didn't know how to drive such a car, she didn't know if she would get caught. She didn't know what would happen to her, she only knew Ethan needed help. The officers stepped forward to ask Mr. Donovan about pressing charges, and for a long moment he didn't answer. He simply stared at the keys they held in a plastic evidence bag, his Lamborghini keys, symbols of wealth, power, and everything he had built, but suddenly they looked meaningless, tiny, unimportant compared to the life of the boy lying behind the emergency room doors. He looked up, his chest rising with a deep breath, and said clearly that no charges would be filed. The officers blinked in surprise, the people around them gasped, a few phones stopped recording, and Rosa felt her knees turn weak from relief and shock. But Mr. Donovan wasn't done. He stepped forward and faced the officers, telling them that Rosa didn't steal the car, she saved his son. She was the only person who cared enough to act when no one else did. Rosa felt emotion building inside her like a rising wave. She covered her mouth with her trembling hands, tears running down her cheeks. The officers softened their expressions, their suspicion replaced with understanding, and they stepped back, releasing the tension in the hallway. But the hospital crowd didn't disappear, their eyes still followed Rosa, some ashamed for judging her, some amazed by her courage, others simply shocked that a maid had done something no one expected. Mr. Donovan approached her slowly, not with the anger he arrived with, but with a heavy mixture of sorrow and gratitude. His voice cracked as he thanked her, really thanked her, not like a boss thanking an employee, but like a father who had almost lost everything. He told her he was sorry he wasn't there, sorry no one listened to her warnings, sorry for every moment she was treated like she didn't matter. Rosa shook her head and whispered that she only did what anyone would do, but deep down, she knew not everyone would risk their job, their freedom, and their safety to save someone else's child. The nurse returned with an update, saying Ethan was stabilizing slowly, but he wasn't awake yet. He needed time, rest, and close monitoring. Rosa closed her eyes in relief, letting out the breath she had been holding for nearly an hour. She leaned against the wall, exhausted, drained, yet strangely at peace knowing he was still fighting. But the night wasn't done with surprises. A group of reporters who had followed the story from the moment the Lamborghini raced through the city gathered near the hospital doors, their cameras flashing, microphones raised, asking questions about the maid who drove the millionaire's car. Some reporters tried to push toward Rosa, but the hospital security blocked them, and for the first time, Mr. Donovan stepped in front of her protectively, telling them to back away, telling them she wouldn't answer anything, telling them she deserved peace, not pressure. Rosa watched him, stunned, because she had never seen him defend anyone like that, especially someone like her, someone from her world, someone from her struggle. The man who barely spoke to her at work was now guarding her from the world. Something inside her chest warmed, not with pride, but with the feeling that she had finally been seen after years of being invisible. Hours passed slowly, each minute stretching like a long thread, and Rosa stayed in the hallway, refusing to leave until she knew Ethan was truly safe. She sat quietly, her hands clasped together, whispering prayers for him, while Mr. Donovan sat a few chairs away, his elbows on his knees, his head in his hands, guilt heavy in his posture, fear thick in his silence, and for the first time in both their lives, the distance between a billionaire and a maid disappeared completely, replaced by the simple truth that they both loved the same little boy. The night slowly deepened around the hospital, the lights in the hallway flickered softly, casting long shadows across the walls. Rosa sat quietly on the hard plastic chair, her fingers intertwined tightly, her eyes fixed on the emergency room doors as if staring hard enough could somehow protect Ethan from harm. she felt the heaviness of exhaustion settle into her bones. But she refused to leave, she refused to rest. Not until she knew the little boy she cared for was safe. Mr. Donovan sat a few chairs away, but his mind was far from calm. He kept replaying everything Rosa had told him, every warning she gave, every cry for help she made, and how he had been too busy shaking hands and smiling at business partners to see the fear in his own son's eyes. Guilt clung to him like a thick fog, choking him with regret. He buried his face in his palms, his shoulders shaking slightly. The image of Ethan collapsing burned painfully into his thoughts. After what felt like an eternity, the doctor returned, his expression serious but calmer than before. He told them Ethan was breathing better now, that he was stable, but he wasn't out of danger yet. He needed monitoring, oxygen support, and rest. Rosa let out a soft sob of relief, her hands trembling as she thanked the doctor over and over. The doctor then added something that changed everything. He said Ethan kept whispering one name even while half-conscious, and that name was Rosa. Mr. Donovan looked at her with surprise, his eyes softening even more. He asked the doctor if they could see Ethan, and after a moment of hesitation, the doctor agreed, but only one at a time. Rosa insisted that Mr. Donovan should go first, but he shook his head gently and told her that Ethan clearly needed her comfort more than anything. Rosa hesitated, unsure if she had the right to stand beside the boy's bed, but the doctor nodded, encouraging her. When Rosa stepped into the dimly lit hospital room, her heart tightened instantly. Ethan lay there, small and fragile, wires attached to his tiny body, oxygen tubes gently blowing air toward him. His eyelids fluttered, his little chest rising and falling with slow effort. Rosa moved closer, her steps quiet, careful, respectful. She reached out and touched his hand softly, and to her shock, his fingers curled weakly around hers. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered his name, telling him she was here, telling him he was safe. Ethan opened his eyes halfway, his voice barely a whisper, calling her Auntie Rosa, the way he always did. He told her he was scared, that everything hurt, and she leaned closer, brushing his hair softly, promising she wouldn't leave him, promising he wasn't alone. Mr. Donovan watched from the doorway, his heart heavy and humbled. He saw how gently she comforted his son, how easily Ethan responded to her presence, how much trust the child placed in her, and it struck him like a quiet truth he had ignored for years. Rosa wasn't just a maid, she was someone who cared deeply, someone who protected without needing a reason, someone who valued life more than her own safety. As Rosa continued to speak softly to Ethan, telling him stories she used to tell her younger cousins when they were sick, Mr. Donovan stepped inside slowly. Standing near the bed, Ethan opened his eyes again, noticing his father, and reached out a small hand. Mr. Donovan took it, trying to hide the emotion swelling in his throat. He apologized to his son, telling him he was sorry, telling him he should have been there. And Ethan simply breathed a tired, "It's okay, Dad." The three of them stayed there, surrounding his bed, holding on to a fragile moment that felt strangely like a family moment, where status, money, and roles didn't matter anymore. Only the connection they shared in that tiny room mattered. After a while, Ethan drifted into a peaceful sleep, his breathing steadier, his face relaxed. Rosa stepped back, ready to leave so Mr. Donovan could have a private moment, but he stopped her gently, asking her to stay a little longer. He admitted he didn't want to be alone with his guilt. He didn't know how to handle the heavy feeling that he could have lost his son tonight, and for the first time, his voice cracked openly in front of her. Rosa placed a hand on his arm, the gesture simple yet powerful, telling him softly that he wasn't a bad father, telling him that work sometimes blinds even the best people, telling him that what mattered was that he was here now, and that Ethan would recover with him by his side. Mr. Donovan stared at her, stunned by her kindness, wondering how someone who had so little could give so much without expecting anything back. Outside the room, the world continued buzzing with drama, reporters spreading stories, people judging without knowing the truth, but inside that small hospital room, everything felt quiet, warm, and human. A poor maid, a powerful millionaire, and a fragile child, 3 lives tied together by one night of fear, courage, and unexpected love. And Rosa had no idea that this night would change her future in a way she never imagined. Morning crept slowly into the hospital, soft golden light spilling across the hallways. Rosa hadn't slept at all. She sat on the same chair outside Ethan's room, her back aching, her eyes burning, but she refused to leave. Every time a nurse walked by, she lifted her head quickly, hoping for good news, hoping for a sign that Ethan was getting stronger. Inside the room, Ethan slept peacefully under warm blankets, the machines beside him beeping steadily, the slow rhythm giving Rosa a small sense of hope. Mr. Donovan had fallen asleep in another chair, his usually perfect suit wrinkled, his expensive watch still on his wrist, but his face looked softer now, more human, touched by the long night that had broken something inside him and rebuilt something else. A nurse approached Rosa gently, asking if she wanted breakfast. Rosa shook her head politely, saying she was fine, but her stomach growled softly. The nurse smiled kindly, leaving a small food tray beside her anyway. Rosa looked at it with quiet gratitude. Her life had always been filled with tiny moments like this, people helping in small ways, because big help rarely came for people like her. As the hospital slowly became busier, people recognized Rosa from the viral videos that had spread online overnight. Strangers passing by whispered and pointed, some with admiration, some with curiosity, some with judgment. Clips of her speeding through traffic in a Lamborghini had circulated everywhere, turning her into a headline she never asked for. Poor Maid drives millionaire's Lamborghini to save child. Hero or criminal? Debate rises after Maid takes owner's car. Courage or theft? City split over hospital drama. Rosa didn't know any of this yet, but she felt the strange stares around her. She kept her head down, holding her hands tightly in her lap. All she cared about was Ethan waking up healthy, everything else felt small in comparison. Around mid-morning, the doctor returned with a soft smile, telling them Ethan was responding well to treatment, his lungs were clearing, his breathing stronger. Rosa felt tears fall instantly, relief washing over her like warm rain. She placed a hand on her heart, whispering a quiet thank you. When the doctor allowed visitors, Rosa stood back to let Mr. Donovan enter first. He walked to the bed and gently brushed Ethan's forehead, whispering to him, apologizing again, promising he would be more present. Rosa watched from the doorway, her eyes soft, her heart full. After a while, Ethan opened his eyes properly for the first time, blinking slowly, confused by the machines and wires, but the moment he saw Rosa standing there, he smiled weakly and whispered her name. Rosa rushed to him instinctively, holding his small hand carefully, tears falling down her cheeks as she told him how brave he was, how strong he had been all night. Ethan asked her quietly if she had been the one who brought him here. Rosa nodded, and he squeezed her hand softly, saying thank you in the most innocent voice, a voice that could melt even the hardest heart. Mr. Donovan watched the interaction, his chest tightening with emotion. He realized his son trusted Rosa more than almost anyone in the mansion, and he understood why. Suddenly, Ethan asked a question that caught both adults by surprise. He looked up at his father and asked if Rosa would be punished for taking the car. Mr. Donovan knelt beside him, shaking his head firmly, telling him she saved his life, telling him she was a hero, not a criminal. Ethan smiled weakly and said, "Good, because I don't want anything bad to happen to her." Those words hit both adults deeply. As the day passed, visitors came and went, nurses checked on Ethan, and the doctors monitored him closely. Rosa stayed near the door, always watching, always ready to help. She didn't want to overstep, but she couldn't walk away either. She felt connected to the boy in a way she couldn't explain. Around noon, Mr. Donovan approached her, asking if she would sit and talk for a moment. Rosa hesitated, unsure what he wanted, but she followed him quietly to a small bench near the window, sunlight pouring in around them, warming their tired faces. He told her he had spent the entire night thinking about everything, about the mansion, the staff, his own behavior, and especially about how blind he had been to the people around him. He confessed he had taken her presence for granted. He had never noticed her struggles, her quiet strength, her silent patience. Rosa shook her head gently, saying she didn't expect anyone to notice her, she was just doing her job. But he interrupted her softly, telling her she wasn't just anything, telling her she mattered, telling her that she was the reason his son was alive. His voice grew emotional, something Rosa had never imagined hearing from her powerful employer. He told her he wanted to talk about her future, about helping her, about making sure she never had to struggle alone again. Rosa blinked, stunned by his words, unaware that he meant every single one of them. And in that moment, sitting on that small bench in a bright hospital hallway, Rosa realized that her life was about to change in ways she never expected. The sun was high in the sky by the time the hospital settled into its slow afternoon rhythm. nurses moved between rooms, families whispered in quiet corners, and the world outside continued its loud chaos, but inside this small hallway, Rosa felt like she was living in a different world, a world where everything had changed overnight. She sat back on the bench after speaking with Mr. Donovan, her mind swirling with thoughts she never allowed herself to dream. She had spent her life believing she would always remain invisible, a woman who cleaned other people's homes, folded other people's clothes, and lived in the background of other people's lives, yet here she was, holding the respect of a powerful millionaire, the gratitude of a child she loved, and the eyes of the entire city watching her story unfold. She didn't ask for any of it, she didn't expect any of it, she only wanted Ethan safe. When she returned to his room, Ethan looked brighter, his cheeks less pale, his breathing stronger beneath the oxygen tubes. He lifted a small hand toward her, smiling weakly as he said he felt better. Rosa sat beside him, her heart swelling with relief. She told him softly that he scared her last night, and Ethan giggled weakly, apologizing like he had done something silly instead of surviving something life-threatening. The quiet moment didn't last long, because soon the hospital corridor filled with noise again, voices rising, footsteps rushing, and camera flashes exploding like stars. Reporters had found out which room Ethan was in, and they crowded the hallway, shouting questions, trying to get photos of Rosa, pushing past nurses and security guards. Why did you take the car? Did you know it was worth millions? Are you worried about being arrested? Do you feel like a hero? Rosa froze, her body stiffening with fear. She hated attention, she hated loudness, she hated feeling trapped. Mr. Donovan saw the panic in her eyes and instantly stepped forward, standing between her and the swarm of reporters, his voice booming through the hallway, telling them to back off, telling them to leave her alone, telling them that Rosa didn't owe anyone an explanation. But the reporters kept shouting, digging for a story, hungry for drama. They tried to twist the night into something scandalous, something exciting, something profitable, and Rosa felt her heart pound painfully, wondering if all this chaos was her fault. Mr. Donovan turned toward her, his voice gentler this time, telling her not to worry, telling her she did the right thing, telling her the world could talk all it wanted but nothing would erase what she had done. Ethan squeezed her hand again, reminding her she mattered. A hospital administrator eventually stepped in, escorting the reporters away and threatening to call the police if they didn't leave the pediatric wing. Slowly the noise faded again, and the hallway returned to its calm, leaving Rosa shaking quietly, overwhelmed by everything happening. After a while, Mr. Donovan asked Rosa to take a walk with him to clear her mind. They stepped outside into the cool afternoon air, the hospital garden quiet except for the soft rustling of leaves. Rosa sat on a wooden bench while Mr. Donovan stood beside her, his hands in his pockets, gathering courage for something difficult. He finally knelt down slightly so he could see her eyes, and what he said next made Rosa freeze. He told her he wanted to change her life. He told her he wanted to pay for her mother's medical treatment. He told her he wanted to offer her a better job inside the mansion, one with respect, safety, and a proper salary. He told her she deserved more than a maid's apron and endless hard days. She deserved a future. Rosa blinked tears away, shaking her head at first, saying she didn't want pity or charity, but he interrupted her gently, saying it wasn't charity, it was gratitude, it was responsibility, it was the least he could do for the woman who saved his son. He told her he had spent years drowning in work, focusing on money, deals, and success, and somewhere along the way he forgot to see the people around him. He admitted that Rosa had more courage in one night than he had shown in years. His voice cracked as he thanked her again, sincerely, deeply, emotionally. Rosa's lips trembled as she whispered that she only did what her heart told her to do. She didn't want anything in return, she didn't expect anything, she only wanted Ethan to live. But Mr. Donovan insisted, telling her she now had a place in their lives, not as a maid, but as someone important, someone trusted, someone valued. As they spoke, Ethan watched them through the window with a small smile, his little hand pressed to the glass. He didn't understand everything, but he knew one thing clearly: Rosa was family to him, not by blood, but by heart. And as Rosa and Mr. Donovan stood together under the soft afternoon sky, the weight of the past night slowly lifted, making space for something new, something hopeful, something life-changing. And Rosa finally realized that sometimes the moments that break you the most become the moments that rebuild you completely.